from Dr. Maya DeLeo.
Hi. Well, I'm sorry. I apologize in advance for my English, for reading, and no presentation for me, so you have to follow. I'm really happy to be here and truly honored to have been invited to this important occasion dedicated to the intertwined dimensions of local and global, of majorities and minorities, of norms and resistance. The title of my short talk today is a reference to the title of my book, Queer, A Cultural History of the LGBT+ community. And today I will introduce some of the main points I made about queer Italian history in that book, and then share with you the starting points for my new research, which is specifically focused on queer Italian history. As for my book, I have chosen to adopt a transnational perspective, focusing on contemporary Western conceptualization of sexualities and underlining the simultaneous emergence of discursive topoi and social practices towards queer sexualities and identities in different geographical and cultural contexts. However, I have not overlooked the national and local specificities. Italy, in particular, offers an interesting perspective on queer history in this respect, define consolidated narratives of modern and traditional, of peripheral and central. Indeed, in the long 19th century, Italy played an active role in pathologizing queer sexualities and identities. We have liberal Italy with its penal code and the decriminalization of sodomy, together with the early criminological contribution of scholars such as Cesare Lombroso, the pioneering sympathetic accounts of homosexual experience by anthropologists such as Paolo Mantegazza. Liberal Italy seemed to make Italy a perfect protagonist in the international debate on queer sexualities and identities. At the same time, foreign Western scholars and observers of the time portrayed illiberal Italy as primitive in terms of sexuality, and the Italian male population in particular was depicted as promiscuous and sexually available, transcending sexological categories and embodying the sensual eroticism of classical antiquity. Indeed, queer Italian subjectivities in modern history emerge from a complex field of power relations in which geography, race, gender, and sexuality are all intertwined. The historical legacy of liberal Italy and then the legacy of the fascist regime with its unique combination of violence and divisibility made the elusiveness of Italian queerness a characteristic trait that persists to this day. As the cultural theorist Derek Duncan has observed, homosexuality among Italians is not a transparent category. I think it's worth delving into this lack of transparency, into the opacity of Italian queer sexualities. The brilliant film studies scholar Nicolas de Villiers examines the hermeneutical value of queer opacity in his work, analyzing it as a strategic tool of resistance. He notes that queer opacity is a visual metaphor and tries to envision alternatives to commands to be visible, but also transparent to a gaze that seeks a clear, responsible identity. With queer opacity, de Villiers is not referring to the mere desire for privacy or to the secrecy surrounding the queer subject, but rather to the queer identities that defy the demand for easy legibility, In this respect, we can say that Italian queer history definitely challenges easy legibility. While simplistic interpretation often state that Italy is behind the ideal linear path of queer history that Benno was describing before, at the same time, in my opinion, describing Italy as queer by nature and thus renouncing further investigations into this elusiveness and reinforcing racist bias is not advisable. Instead, by dismissing comparisons and borrowing the idea of queer opacity, along with Jack Halberstam's fundamental notion of queer darkness, we can explore the dark territories and be able, as Halberstam writes, to trace the lines of the wars left behind. In my book, A Liberal Italy was mostly analyzed as a peripheral entity, a land on the frontier, a sotadic zone, in the words of the English geographer Sir Richard Francis Burton, who described queerness as a racial institution in Italy. While we can reject Burton's racist view, we should also analyze the legacy of this conceptualization. Indeed, liberal Italy turns out to be an erogenous zone of the modern Western geographical body. These are the words of the political philosopher Rada Ivekovic talking about Balkans, but we can borrow her words. For these reasons, many Italian speakers of the time were eager to emphasize the sexual savagery of the southern Italian population, drawing on the anti-southern racism that was widespread in Italian scientific and political culture. Nevertheless, I investigated how many cultivated Italian queer men resignified the northern gaze by referring to classical antiquity in order to fabricate a queer cultural genealogy. In doing so, they were able to resist the dominant Italian discourse that depicted homosexuality and queerness as an exotic evil, even if their strategy remained an elitist one. This is a very interesting example of the dispute over the true nature of the sexed body of the Italian nation. The peripherality of the Italian nation within the Western zone and the unfamiliarity of the Italian elites with many Italian territories made this a burning issue and added a growing anxiety about the masculinity of Italian men. But as I was saying before, Italian history defies the simplistic dichotomy of peripheral and central. In many ways, Italy is indeed central. As far as post-war Italy is concerned, as I pointed out in my book, Italy is at the center of the biopolitical claims of the Catholic Church. Contrary to popular belief, these claims are not simply due to the conservatism of the Catholic Church, but actually represent a modern strategy within the political battlefield for sovereignty against the modern governmentality of the nation state. From this perspective, it is interesting to consider the Italian nationalism, which, in the words of Alberto Mario Banti, highlights the naturalistic and deterministic elements on which the idea of nationality has been based since the Risorgimento. Many scholars have pointed out how these criteria are linked to the norms of gender and sexuality. In particular, recent studies have highlighted the central construction of womanhood, which is relegated to a white, bourgeois, heterosexual, and reproductive subjectivity, and the centrality of its use as a rhetorical device in determining the perception of Italianness. i.e. the criteria for the entry of the female population into the institutional and political life of the country. The persistence of womanhood as motherhood remains at the heart of the process of nationalization of women, not only under the fascist regime, but also in the post-war period, as Marina D'Amelia describes in her essay, La Mamma. In this respect, Meloni's well-known litany, woman, mother, Italian, Christian, is more than a rhetorical device, but rather a reference to a very precise idea of nation and citizenship. In fact, motherhood in post-war Italy has been portrayed exclusively as white, as Silvana Patriarca pointed out recently in her Il colore della Repubblica. The solutions imagined for biracial children in post-war Italy actually lead to their removal outside the national borders, making their integration to the social body of the nation impossible. I'm not trying here to trace inappropriate analogies between the two different exclusions experienced by Black and queer subjects. Rather, I want to emphasize the dominant vision of the Italian social body and its eugenic connotations. As for queer subjects associated with sterility and degeneration, they remained excluded from the social body of the nation for a long time. More recently, the dramatic change in the social and cultural perception of queer subjects over the last decades did not correspond to their access to a full citizenship. My new research, titled Gender, Sexuality, and Politics in Italy, is aimed at analyzing the inclusion of queer subjects into the national social body. Focusing on the analysis of private sources, I'm currently investigating their negotiations with the key element of the Italian nation and citizenship, family. And the more elusive and the less as sociologist Chiara Bertone has pointed out, families has indeed been the primary articulation space of LGBTQ+ issues as political issues in Italy over the last decades. The legislative vacuum in Italy following the creation of AGEDO, Association of Parents of Homosexual Persons, in 1992, is, as Bertone notes, an extremely revealing fact. Were queer subjects able to challenge or modify the naturalistic assumption of the family? Did they mobilize the idea of family, or did they have to navigate their social and political integration within the naturalistic framework of genus? My research takes into account the history of Italian queer subjects, hoping to provide some useful inputs for the political claims of the present day. Same-sex marriage, legal measures against hate and discrimination, and the urgent new law on gender identity. More broadly, my research aims to deconstruct essentialist and heteronormative views of Italianness and to outline new forms of kinship and citizenship. I already have done with.
Thank you, Dr. DeLeo, for showing us how some of these difficult legacies of conceptualization are directly related to current political discourses. Thank you. Okay, so we now have 20 minutes for discussion, and I'm told we will be using a microphone for audience members to pose their questions. invite you now to share your thoughts on the panelists. Thank you. Yusuf.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a question two questions. One for Lindsay, about this relation between intimacy and domination. I would be very interested in this. Do you work on this concretely in your research? E poi una domanda a Paola su questa diversità e disparità tra donne e tra femminismo. Cosa vuol dire? Cioè che non tutte le donne hanno partecipato al femminismo o cosa vuol dire? Grazie.
Is it on? The relationship between intimacy and domination, I think, is, for me anyway, is the key in understanding the persistence of gender-based violence and the ways, I mean, most people, despite the fact that in the Irish context, abuse has been externalized to institutions like the Catholic Church. In fact, we know most people's experience of abuse happens within the family, within the home, within the most intimate settings they have. And I think that we've a tendency to put violence and love as polar opposites. But in fact, the way in which people were socialized, certainly in Ireland for much of the time, is that these two forces were actually intimately connected. And I think trying to understand, both culturally and socially, the way people were taught to think about love and to think about violence and to think about the body and sexuality in really relational ways is incredibly important for us to try and unpick the persistence of intimate gender violence to this day. So yeah, it's really important to what I do.
Grazie per la domanda che mi permette insomma di approfondire un po' di più un tema che ho soltanto toccato molto velocemente. Disparità, differenze fra donne e fra femminismi. Allora, c'è tra i vari motivi per cui effettivamente può essere stato così difficile poi scrivere la storia dei femminismi degli anni 70, probabilmente c'è anche il tema di come raccontare un movimento apparentemente, come dire, unitario, coeso, ma che in realtà era attraversato da moltissime differenze, da moltissime anche conflittualità tra gruppi, tra figure, tra persone. E quindi da questo punto di vista le nuove generazioni forse in alcuni casi possono essere più serene, più disinvolte, innanzitutto nel raccontare anche i momenti di conflitto. Ma c'è un'altra questione, che è quanto abbia pesato il tema delle differenze sociali, di classe, culturali dentro il movimento e nel processo anche di crescita del movimento stesso. Da un lato appunto questa necessità di creare una coesione interna, come dire, forte, una contrapposizione poi anche alle istituzioni, ai partiti, ai gruppi, e al tempo stesso poi scoprire man mano che il movimento cresce che le differenze di classe pesano tantissimo e sono state poche di fatto le femministe o i gruppi che durante gli anni 70 hanno messo a tema questo, cioè il peso delle differenze. Una di queste mi fa piacere ricordarla perché ieri erano i 30 anni dalla sua morte, è stata Miki Staderini, una femminista molto importante a Roma, ma in realtà ha dato un contributo enorme allo studio, come dire, alla questione della pornografia e della prostituzione e a questa analisi nel corso degli anni '80. Miki Staderini è una delle poche che ha detto chiaramente dobbiamo porci il problema delle differenze di classe soprattutto tra le donne e non far finta che non esistano. Esistono anche in un fronte come quello della sessualità, della battaglia sull'aborto, no? Per dire, dove da un lato abbiamo davanti agli occhi una situazione di oppressione che ha nella sessualità un po' il suo fulcro e al tempo stesso questa si riproduce in modo differente, appunto non si usava la parola intersezionalità, ma insomma questo il senso, questo era. E quindi c'è stata una rivista Differenze che ha provato a mettere a tema appunto il peso delle disparità, ma è rimasta a lungo insomma un tema difficile da maneggiare, che oggi invece le ricerche affrontano con molta più serietà, a partire dagli stimoli appunto dei femminismi postcoloniali che, come dire, che hanno rivendicato appunto questa non universalità, diciamo così, e però se guardiamo anche agli stessi femminismi locali, appunto se guardiamo anche delle realtà più piccole, vediamo come si riproducevano il tema delle disparità. Quindi credo di ho risposto.
I had a question for the panel. What does it mean to do this work in today's climate, to write the histories of gender, women, and queer narratives? And has it become a political project in itself, a type of activism? And what sort of obstacles, if any, have you faced in doing this work? So this is a question that perhaps any of you might want to take up. Okay, thank you.
I think that's one of the things why I put so much emphasis on collaboration. Is it okay if I respond in English? Ich soll bei Deutsch bleiben? Good. All right. But why I put so much emphasis on collaboration and participatory knowledge production, because I think that also concerns the collaboration between academics and activists. And of course, if I look at the PhD students I'm working with, it's indistinguishable, right? A lot of them are activists and at the same time they are academics, although they are kind of different registers, right? They're different perspectives, and that's why finding a mode of communicating that takes each other's position serious is absolutely key. And I would actually also broaden this. Of course, it's queer history, gender history, women's history, the chairs. If you look at the situation in Germany, they just disappear. There is more and more parliamentary questions in state parliaments from the Alternative for Germany that asks, why are we funding this kind of research? And I'm sure there is similar experiences in other countries, unfortunately. So there is I call it an onslaught that is often comes in the guise of economic necessities. So for example, the MA Queer History program I helped to build in London in the UK is by now ceased to exist due to financial necessities, right? So there is a real struggle to be fought. By the way, I also think for history at large, right? The humanities altogether are under attack. And why is this important, and why does it have a political dimension? Because I think the stories we tell are not the only, but a crucial addition to contemporary present-day debates in an activist and political settings. And that's, I think, also why I think all of us emphasize the diversity of the stories, right? Because there is, not just one narrative that fits everybody. So it's also crucial for historians to offer those different narratives, or as Maya put it, the more legible or less legible narratives, right? That are easily recognizable, and those that are less easily recognizable. I think that's and some of them are emancipatory and about a struggle out of the open and demonstrations. But other stories are about trying to survive, trying to create a space of your own, where you can thrive and maintain a living. So I think that's why I think it's really our task to provide those stories, and then also to engage in public debates to make sure that those stories come across.
Due parole perché mi ritrovo in quanto è stato detto. Credo che per chi fa appunto storia delle donne e di genere l'impegno, come dire, l'orizzonte dell'impegno politico civile sia fondamentale, sia cruciale, ma credo che la questione più importante sia non negarlo, nel senso che abbiamo una tradizione di studi, ma a livello internazionale, appunto, di chi fa storia delle donne e di genere, che esplicita questo e che si confronta quindi sul terreno scientifico su che cosa significa, come dire, portare avanti delle ricerche che siano rigorose ma che al tempo stesso hanno l'ambizione di avere un impatto sulla società. E credo che sia rendere tutto ciò esplicito sia qualcosa di estremamente importante in un contesto in cui, almeno in Italia, non so bene in altri paesi, ma sembra esserci ancora la pretesa della neutralità dello sguardo storico sul passato, cioè sembra ancora che si possa rivendicare uno sguardo neutro. Noi sappiamo che non è così, noi ci misuriamo con questa negoziazione continua, con questa sfida appunto, e credo che sia invece un patrimonio di esperienze fondamentali di cui dovrebbero tenere conto chiunque, anche chi si occupa di temi molto, di altre prospettive di ricerca, insomma.
Vado in italiano anch'io, posso, sì. No, perché,
Non avevo capito.
no, perché io avevo in inglese, ok. Sì, no, anch'io sono d'accordo con Paola, c'è questa idea, il sospetto, diciamo così, della militanza su chi fa studi queer, LGBT è ancora fortissimo in realtà, quindi c'è questa idea della storia minoritaria, della storia militante e sicuramente molto dello sforzo, anche per quanto mi riguarda, sì, è mostrarsi come attendibili, mostrarsi come riuscire a comunicare, no? Il proprio posizionamento senza tuttavia far sì che questo poi getti una luce un po' dubbia, no? sul nostro lavoro di ricerca. Per quanto riguarda gli studi LGBT, diciamo che un po' il mio sforzo è questo, no? Proprio di mostrare quanto in realtà uno sguardo queer, una prospettiva queer sia in grado di in realtà illuminare degli aspetti cruciali poi della storia nel suo insieme, nella sua interezza. Quello che appunto ho fatto con il mio libro era proprio questo, aveva un po' l'ambizione di essere uno sguardo queer sulla storia contemporanea piuttosto che una storia contemporanea della comunità LGBT. Però quando faccio questo non è perché voglio inserirmi a pieno titolo nella comunità dellu storic, perché mi sembra davvero che questioni importanti che ho citato oggi, appunto la costruzione dello Stato-nazione, l'idea di nazionalità e cittadinanza, non possono essere analizzati se non teniamo conto anche di questa lente. E così l'intersezionalità, la razzializzazione, l'alterizzazione sono meccanismi che ci portano a usare anche la lente queer. Quindi c'è un impegno politico, sicuramente un orizzonte politico che però appunto va al di là poi che è, di quello che si può immaginare che è l'impegno politico per la comunità LGBT. Di nuovo quello che è proprio al centro è questa decostruzione delle categorie, dei concetti, delle idee, uno sguardo critico, no? Che gli studi di genere hanno sempre portato e che credo gli studi queer possono portare. Quindi sì, gli ostacoli secondo me rimangono proprio sulla legittimità di chi prende parola, di chi porta questi studi. Ancora c'è questo ostacolo iniziale proprio relativo alla presa di parola. Non so se ho risposto.
Yeah, I mean, reiterate really what the other speakers have said. For me, it works on three levels. In the Irish situation, because some of the issues that have come to the fore have been sort of legacy issues to do with abuse of children and women in institutions, historians were called to act as witnesses for the state, and some did, and I think it really compromised the legitimacy of the discipline, because in fact they produced narratives that were linear, that were flattening, that actually allowed a narrative that could say this entire architecture was the fault of individual families, which of course cuts across the idea of any one family having the same power as the other, the idea that the family is a united source against a united state. The kind of fallacy of that was really distressing for survivors. For me, I became kind of accidental in terms of my activism. When I started, I was told by my female supervisor not to touch women's studies, that isn't history. So I spent the first 3 years in the archive not touching it and constantly being sucked into the vortex because nothing made sense unless I did. And then I realized that was at the heart of the politics of the discipline in Ireland. Modern Irish history was really intimately connected with the legitimacy of the state. And the university I was in was a state university. I'm now no longer in a state university, and it's very interesting to see the differences. So, and then the other level, I suppose, is this idea of our own subjectivity, which I think everybody has touched on. And I was really moved by what you were saying about this idea of queer methodology, or what Mo Moulton calls non-binary. If you try and think and place yourself consciously in a place where all of those categories, including the category in which you enter the archive in my case, white, middle class, lapsed Catholic Irish woman, for whom much of these messages were fairly kind of linear and direct, and for other people they were imagined subjects that weren't seen. And so I think it works on so many levels. And finally, the most powerful place is in the classroom for me, right? I think it still is. That's where you can literally see yourself really contributing to changing someone's perspective in life and giving them a tiny sense that they have purchase on history and on what the future can provide. So that would be for me.
Okay. I will just ask in English. I mean, there are many thoughts and questions that one could bring up, but I think in general, because there are differences also to my knowledge and my perception between women and gender and queerness. But I was wondering if you could, in short, respond a little bit if you think or see or notice or experience any sort of loaded or problematic oppression or repression towards your own research because of the geopolitical atmosphere that we are having, which seems to speed up very drastically and dramatically. So I was wondering if these geopolitical influences are affecting your research basically, or fundings, or access to archives and so on. Thank you. And thank you for your contributions.
I mean, I think all of us can respond to that. It's really difficult to say when it comes to funding, right? Because these decisions are sort of intransparent often, right? Also when it comes to filling positions. So I really don't want to speculate. But what I can say is that I think it's more complicated, right? Or for the time being, right? It might be more straightforward. In places like Poland, it was pretty clear, right? That's why a lot of Polish students who wanted to do queer history came to Florence to do what they wanted to do, because for a while, now we hope things are changing again. For a while, they couldn't do what they wanted to do in Poland. But I think for the time being, in most scenarios, it's not that there is staunch opposition to within academic decision-making, staunch opposition to anything to do with queerness or a more radical form of gender history. But it comes through financial necessities, as I indicated before. And if generally within history resources are getting scarcer and scarcer, there is, of course, kind of struggles, and then kind of there's decisions to be made. Which field kind of gets how much, shall we say. And I think that's also one of the reasons why intersectionality is so important, because it allows us to cooperate across fields and make a stronger claims. I mean, this is kind of also within the academic setting. This is a very political struggle. And I think it's therefore also important to broaden kind of the topics. And to kind of, that would be my suggestion, to make a strong argument for history and historical research and historical analysis as a form that allows members of the public and different kind of parts of the public to critically engage and in a reflexive fashion engage with questions around difference. And as you said in the very beginning, right, this is going to be something that is needed for the maintenance or for maintaining democratic structures within our societies. So that's, I don't know whether that is convincing enough, but that for the time being, so kind of talk about a broader array of differences and kind of try to come up with narratives and analysis that allow people to reflexively, right, without fixing identities, but kind of reflexively and critically engage with questions of difference on various levels.
All right, so thank you for that. So I have two final tasks. One is to let you know that there is coffee waiting for us in the atrium, and second, for us to give this panel a round of applause for all of the thought-provoking presentations that they shared with us and set us on a course for the opening of perspectives and the unsettling that we will be doing throughout the day. Thank you.